Hi, I'm the developer of this asset, and in this video I will show you how easy it is to set up the dialogue system in a few minutes. I am currently in my Unity project, and I have already imported the dialogue system asset. I have also prepared a simple scene which has a dialogue UI that has two text objects, one for showing the name of the speaker, and the other is a placeholder for displaying the message that the speaker wants to deliver. Then we have also a choices container here, which will hold our choice prefabs, but we'll get to that later, so you don't have to worry too much about this. Then there is a player game object, which is a simple sprite renderer as well as an NPC. Now the aim of this video is to allow this player to have a conversation with the NPC. So if you are ready, let's get right into it. The first thing we need are the dialogue characters for our game objects. So let's right click, create, dialogue system character. We can name this one player, and here in the inspector we can fill in the fields. So let's say that the character name is Arthur, and then we can define a list of emotions that this character can have. We will not use the emotions in this video, but you can use these to trigger animations or show different sprites and stuff like that. Now let's create a character for our NPC. Once we have our characters, it's time to create a dialogue. To create a dialogue, you can right click and select Create, Dialogue System, Dialogue Tree. We can name this one Dialogue 1. And then when you double click on the dialogue tree, it will open up the dialogue tree editor. Here you can visually manage and create your dialogues. When you right click within the dialogue tree, you can create different types of nodes. So let's just try to create a new dialogue node. As you can see, the dialogue node has several fields that we can use. The important thing to note here is that you only need to fill in the fields that you are actually going to use. So for example, the first field is speaker, and since we do want to use the speaker in our dialogue UI, we will have to fill this in. So let's say that our first message will deliver our player. So let's just drag and drop the player into this field. Once we have a valid speaker, additional speaker emotion and speaker position fields are shown. We are not going to use these in our UI, so let's just skip these. We also don't need to use bubble type or audio, so let's skip these fields as well. Finally, we can fill in the message that our speaker will deliver. Next field is listeners, where we can create a list of listeners that can react to what the speaker is saying. These are also character objects, and they can react by changing their position or emotion. We are not going to use these, so we can skip these as well. The last field is time, and we can input 3 here, because we will use this field to move to the next node after 3 seconds. Now our dialogue node is done, so let's just create 2 more dialogue nodes and connect everything to make our dialogue a little more interesting. Now that we have our dialogue nodes completed, it's time to close out our dialogue by creating an end node. The end node has a single field called Next Dialogue. This field can be used to link to another dialogue tree. We will use this field to set the NPC's next active dialogue after the current one finishes. Since we don't have any other dialogue trees, we can just put dialogue 1 here, and so that way the NPC will trigger the same dialogue again. Awesome! Now our dialogue tree is ready, so it's time to make it work in our scene. To connect the dialog tree with our dialog UI, we need to create a custom C# script. Now, if you're not a very experienced developer, don't worry. The code is going to be very easy to follow. So let's go ahead and create new C# script, and we can name this DialogueUIManager example. Just make sure that you don't call this DialogueUIManager, because that's the name of the class that we're going to inherit from. The first thing we want to do is add usage for our dialog system, so that we can access files from dialog system asset. Then, instead of inheriting from MonoBehavior, we want to inherit from DialogueUIManager. And since the DialogueUIManager class inherits from MonoBehavior, we will be able to use this class as a standard MonoBehavior. However, we will also have access to additional functionality provided within the DialogueUIManager. We can also get rid of the start and update functions. As you can see, the title is underlined, and that's because we need to override some functions. So let's just hover over the title and we can select Implement Abstract Class. These override methods correspond to different node types that we can have. All we have to do is fill in the logic for our UI. So first of all, let's create some variables at the top. The first variable that we need is a current dialog that will keep track of the NPC's current dialog. Then we need access to our DialogueUI game object, as well as speaker name text object that will display the speaker of the message, and finally a dialog text object that will display the actual message. Before we jump into filling these override methods, let's think about how we want to start and proceed with the dialog. Let's say that we will use character I on the keyboard to start the dialog, and then we will use time fields to move to the next node automatically. To do that, we will firstly need to check for the input in the update function, and then we can use DialogueManager. DialogueManager is a variable provided from the DialogueUIManager, and this variable contains several useful properties and functions that we can use. For example, the DialogueStarted property tells us whether the DialogueManager is currently processing some dialog. So, if user presses I on their keyboard, and the DialogueManager is not processing any dialog, then we want to start a dialog. So we will call DialogueManager.startDialog, and we will pass there the current dialog variable. Finally, all we have to do is just say DialogueUI.setActive, so that we will show the dialog UI in our scene. Great, so let's go ahead and fill in the onDialogNode function. Here we will firstly get a message from our dialog node and set it as a text to our dialog text. Then we will get a speaker, and we will set speaker name to our speaker name text. Finally, we will start a coroutine called wait, and we will pass time from our dialog node. So let's just create this coroutine under this function. And what this coroutine does is that it will firstly wait for whatever time we will pass in, and then it will call DialogueManager.nextNode, which will move our dialog to the next node. Lastly, let's fill in the onEndNode function. And all we have to do here is first of all set the current dialog to be the next dialog of our end node, and then we can set the dialog UI to be inactive so that it is no longer showing in our scene. And since we are only using dialog nodes and end nodes, we are done for now, so let's go ahead and test our scene. Okay, so back in our Unity editor, the first thing that we need to do is add a component to our MPC. So the component that we will add is our DialogueUIManager example script that we have just created. Now we need to fill in all these fields. So first of all, our current dialog is going to be dialog 1. Then our dialog UI is right here. Then the speaker name text and the dialog text. Okay, let's go ahead and hit play. Alright, so now I'm going to press I on my keyboard, and as you can see, the dialog pops up, and after 3 seconds it moves to the next node, Let's wait for more. It goes to the next node, and finally, after 3 seconds, the dialog is over. To make our dialog even better, let me show you how you can create choices. So let's open up the dialog in the editor, and here I will create new choice node. As you can see, the choice node has the same fields as the dialog node, with additional button for creating choices. Now I'll just fill in the fields, create 2 choices, and connect everything with the rest of the dialog. Once that's done, we can move back to our script to create UI logic for choice nodes. First of all, let's create variables that we are going to need. The first variable is a choices container, which is a game object from our Dialog UI. This game object will be a parent to every choice prefab that we will instantiate. A second variable is a choice prefab. Now we can fill in the logic for the onChoiceNode function. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we have all the dependencies. So we'll add using Unity engine.ui. And now we can go ahead and see what happens in this function. So first of all, we get the message of the choice node, and we set this message as a text to our dialog text. Then we get a speaker, we get the speaker's name, and we set his name to be the text of our speaker name text. Finally, we have a for loop here. And in this for loop, in every iteration we instantiate choice from our choice prefab, and then we set the choices container as a parent to this choice. Then we get the button component from our choice, and we set the onClick function to be the onChoiceClick function, passing the index. Finally, we have the TextMeshPro component in the children, and we set the text of this component to be the message of our choice. So now let me just paste here the onChoiceClick function. And what happens here is we get an index, and the first thing that we do is we call DialogueManager.nextNode, passing the index. Then we destroy every choice, because once you click on a choice, you want to clear the Dialog UI. So we basically clear all the choices that are currently instantiated in the choices container. Alright, so now that's all we need to do, so let's just get back into the Unity editor and set this up. Okay, so back in our Unity editor, all we have to do is fill in the fields for the variables that we have created. So first of all, the choices container, and then the choice prefab, which I have in the prefabs folder. So let me just drag and drop this. And now let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens. Alright, so let's hit I on the keyboard. And after 3 seconds, the Dialog UI with choices is shown. So I can select, for example, the choice 2. And as you can see, I clicked on choice 2. The next thing that I want to show you is how you can trigger any Unity event within the dialog. So the first thing we need is a dialog event object. So let's just right click and select create, dialog system, dialog event. We can name this event hide player, because we will use this event to make our player disappear. Then we can go to our dialog 1, and here we can create a new event node. Now let's put our hide player event to the dialog event field, and we can leave the time at 0. Now what I'm gonna do is I will connect the second choice to the event node, so that when user clicks on the second choice, it will make the player disappear. Once that's done, we can go back to our script to fill in the logic for the onEventNode function. Alright, so back in our script, we can navigate to onEventNode function. And all we have to do here is first of all invoke the dialog event from the event node. And then once the event was triggered, we can move to the next node. And that's literally all the code we need for our events to work. Now we can go back to the Unity editor. The very last thing left to do is to add DialogueUIManager prefab to our scene. You can find the prefab under IndieDevs, Dialog System, Prefabs, and Managers. So let's just drag and drop the prefab into our scene. The very important thing to note is that DialogueUIManager is a singleton. That means that you can have only one of these per scene. If you try to add more of these, all of them except one will be destroyed. Now in the DialogueUIManager script, you can map dialog event objects to the actual Unity events that you want to call. So let's just put hide player event to this field, and then we can create as many Unity events as we want here. So what we want to do is we will drag and drop player here, and once we drag the game object here, we can have access to all the scripts that are attached to that game object. And since we want to inactivate our player, we can go to game object and say set active will be false. Now that's all we need to do. Let's just hit play and see if it works. Okay, so I will hit I on my keyboard, and after 3 seconds we should see the choices. Okay, so let me select the second one, and boom, the player is gone. So everything is working as expected. The final thing that I'll show you is how you can check value of any variable within the dialog. So since we want to check the value of some script, I will really quickly create a new C# script for our player. So let's just open up the script in the editor. And all I will do here is I will simply create a public integer representing a number of coins that our player has. So let's say that by default our player will have 50 coins. Okay, so back in the editor, what we want to do is firstly add our player script to our player game object. So this one right here. And then what we need to do is we need to create a dialog variable for our number of coins variable. The dialog system supports 4 different variable types, which are string, integer, float, and boolean. Since our number of coins is integer, we can right click and select create, dialog system, dialog variable, integer variable. And we can name this one number of coins as well. Now let's go to our dialog, and here we can create a new if node. The if node lets you create as many conditions as you want, but what I will do is I will simply check only one condition. So here I can input my number of coins variable, and what I will do is I will check if number of coins is bigger or equal to 100, and otherwise I will show some other dialog. So let me just create some new dialog node and connect this if node with the rest of the dialog. Okay, so my dialog tree is done. What I did here is I changed this dialog node to say I am rich, and this dialog node will show if number of coins is at least 100. Otherwise, it will show I am poor. The next thing that we want to do is go to our script and fill in the onIfNode function. All we have to do in the onIfNode function is simply call DialogueManager.nextNode, and this will handle the conditional logic for us. Now that's all we had to do. Let's get back to the Unity editor. The only thing left to do is to add DialogueVariableManager prefab to our scene. You can find the prefab under IndieDevs, Dialog System, Prefabs and Managers. So let's just drag and drop the prefab into our scene. And similarly to DialogueUIManager, this variable manager is also a singleton, so you can have at most one of these per scene. Now here in the Dialog variable manager script, you can map Dialog variables to the actual variables from the scene. So since our variable is an integer, we need to go to this one. And here I can click on plus to add a new element. Now the key is going to be our number of coins Dialog variable. And the value is going to be from our player. So let's just drag the player right here. And once you drag a valid game object, you can see all the scripts that are attached to that game object. Now our number of coins variable is under the player script. And here we can select number of coins. Now this is all we had to do. Let's just hit play and see if everything works. Alright, so let me press I on my keyboard. And as you can see, it says I am poor because currently the value is set to 50. Now let me just close this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set number of coins to 105, for example. And let's see what happens now. Alright, so let's press I. And as you can see, it says I'm rich. Okay, so that's it for this quick little setup video. I hope that it showed you just how easy to use and flexible this dialog system really is. If you have some questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or you can also post them in our Discord channel.